Madison Harper understood the mathematics of desperation. 28 years old, she had learned to calculate everything in terms of survival. Medical bills multiplied like a virus she couldn't contain. Her mother, Claire, had entered stage 4 cancer 6 months ago, and every treatment not covered by insurance became another weight pressing down on a debt that now exceeded $230,000. Madison worked double shifts at Romano's Steakhouse in downtown Charlotte, where wealthy people celebrated deals worth more than she would earn in 3 lifetimes. Her feet existed in a constant state of complaint. Her smile had become a skill perfected through repetition rather than genuine warmth. Her dreams had contracted to the size of next month's rent and her mother's next chemotherapy appointment. Jonathan Pierce moved through the world differently. 62 years old, his $300 million created an invisible force field around him wherever he went. He saw obstacles not as challenges, but as problems for other people to solve. His real estate empire sprawled across North Carolina like a carefully designed game he had already won. The Italian leather shoes touching Romano's plush carpet had cost more than Madison's 2009 Honda Civic. His watch, a vintage Patek Philippe, could have covered her mother's entire experimental treatment protocol at the Mayo Clinic. When he entered a room, conversations didn't stop, but they subtly adjusted. People found reasons to mention their accomplishments in his presence. They straightened their spines. They pulled their shoulders back. This isn't a redemption story. This is the account of how a forgotten photograph exposed 3 generations of lies built on silence and power. There will be no magical resolution here, only the messy, complicated truth of how family secrets destroy lives across generations, and how sometimes the smallest gesture of courage can bring an entire empire of deception crashing down. Romano's existed as a cathedral to wealth. The space exhaled dark, wood, and old money. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears, casting light that made everything appear more valuable than it actually was. The air itself felt expensive, a mixture of aged steaks, truffle oil, and something indefinably exclusive that money learned to manufacture. It was Thursday evening in October, the kind of night when the autumn chill outside made the warmth inside feel almost suffocating. At 7:47 p.m., the restaurant hummed with the low frequency of powerful conversations. Deals were being finalized. Relationships were being negotiated. Wealth was celebrating itself. Madison moved between tables with the precision of someone who had learned to be invisible while remaining indispensable. Her black dress fit perfectly, not too fitted, not too loose. Her smile had been rehearsed in the bathroom mirror for 7 years. She poured water with her left hand, cleared plates with her right, anticipated needs before customers articulated them. She had become a ghost in the machine, present but unnoticed, essential but overlooked. Her coworkers rarely remembered conversations with her after shifts ended. Customers thanked her but never truly saw her. This isn't a fairy tale where magic intervenes and circumstances transform. What you're about to witness is what happens when one woman's desperate need for truth collides with a powerful man's carefully constructed legacy. There will be no supernatural intervention, no lucky coincidences that feel too convenient to be real. Only the raw, complicated mathematics of how family honor intersects with survival, and what happens when the past refuses to remain buried beneath layers of silence and wealth. If you want to know how this impossible story ends, how a single moment of recognition unraveled decades of deception and brought a powerful man to his knees, make sure you subscribe right now. Hit that button before the next twist catches you completely off guard, because this is the kind of story that changes how you understand power, family, and what people will do to protect their legacy. Table 12 occupied the corner booth, the premium position reserved for the most important guests. Madison had memorized the hierarchy of seating within Romano's the way a general studies battlefield terrain. Corner booths meant privacy, status, and customers who understood they were being shown respect simply by their placement. The man sitting alone wore a charcoal suit tailored to fit his frame like a second layer of skin. His face carried the weathered confidence of someone who had negotiated with senators and billionaires before breakfast. Madison approached with water pitcher held at precisely the correct angle. Her movements had been reduced to efficiency through repetition. pour from the left, step back. Position the water glass precisely 3 inches from the edge of the table. The man did not look up from his leather-bound menu. "Good evening, sir. I'll give you a moment to decide," she said. Her voice calibrated to be heard but not memorable. He acknowledged her with a single nod. Nothing more. Madison turned to leave when something caught the edge of the chandelier light. On his lapel, a silver pin glinted. It was small, maybe 1.5 inches in length, ornate in a way that suggested expensive craftsmanship. The shape was familiar. A compass rose delicately etched, and there, a rose engraved in the center of the compass. Its petals so detailed they seemed ready to unfold. Madison's hand stilled. The water pitcher suddenly felt impossibly heavy. She had seen that exact pin. Not similar, identical. Down to the rose. Down to the way the compass points were angled. Down to the micro-scratches on the silver that suggested it had been worn close to a heart for decades. Her mother's pin sat in a velvet box at home, tucked in the bottom of her jewelry drawer. Madison had grown up watching her mother touch it, the way other people touched rosaries. The pin had never left the house. Her mother had never worn it outside. She had kept it wrapped in tissue paper, protected like it was made of something more fragile than silver. Madison's heart began to accelerate. Her pulse became audible in her ears, a rapid drumming that made it impossible to focus on anything else. Cold sweat erupted across her palms. The water pitcher grew slippery. She gripped it tighter, afraid she would drop it. Family legend says there's only one. Her mother had told her when Madison was 11. Handcrafted in 1952 by a silversmith in Boston. Only one commission. Only one pin. Your great-grandmother Eleanor wore it until the day she died. Madison's breath came shallow. Around her, other waiters moved through the dining room. Other conversations continued. Other forks clinked against other plates. But in this moment, the entire restaurant felt impossibly quiet. She was drowning in sound she couldn't quite hear. The man at table 12 continued reading his menu, unaware that Madison Harper's entire understanding of reality was reorganizing itself in real time. She turned away, her legs moving on autopilot. In the kitchen, she steadied herself against the steel counter. Her hands trembled. The other servers noticed but said nothing. Everyone at Romano's had learned that invisible people were best left undisturbed. Madison made a decision. She would go back. She would ask. She would discover where that pin had come from. She had no idea that decision would change everything. Madison returned to table 12 5 minutes later. Her decision had solidified into something resembling courage, though her shaking hands suggested otherwise. She had rehearsed the words in her mind, had practiced a tone. Casual but direct, professional but honest. Nothing accusatory. Just a simple observation shared between strangers. "Excuse me, Mr. Pierce," she began, and was immediately interrupted by the elevation of his eyebrows. He knew his name would be used. He had the kind of presence that announced itself before introductions occurred. "I apologize for the interruption, but I noticed your pin. My mother has one exactly like it." The fork in his hand froze midair. His jaw tightened with the precision of a door slamming shut. His eyes shifted toward her, and Madison felt the full weight of his attention in a way that made her understand why people feared him. This wasn't anger, not exactly. It was the predatory focus of something that had identified a threat and calculated the most efficient way to neutralize it. "That's impossible," he said. His voice contained no question mark. It was delivered as verdict, as absolute fact, as the word of a man accustomed to never being challenged. "This pin belonged to my grandmother. It's one of a kind, commissioned and created in 1952 by a Boston silversmith. There's no other pin identical to this one." Madison felt her resolve waver, but something deeper kept her anchored. This was about her mother. This was about her great-grandmother Eleanor. This was about decades of family shame over an accusation that had never made sense. "My mother has one exactly like it," Madison repeated. Her voice steadied as she spoke. "Same design, same rose etching, same silver work. She's had it her entire life. Her mother, my great-grandmother Eleanor, received it as a gift from your family in 1952. Jonathan Pierce's face underwent a visible transformation. The dismissal shifted into something darker. His thin lips pressed into a single harsh line. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of a declaration delivered in courtrooms and boardrooms across multiple decades. "Your mother is either mistaken or lying," he said. The words landed like a physical blow. "The circumstances of this pin are known to my family alone. Whatever your mother claims, I can assure you that she is either confused or deliberately fabricating a story to advance some agenda I'm not interested in entertaining." He reached into his wallet with deliberate slowness. His movements were calculated to demonstrate control and dominance. He withdrew a $100 bill and placed it on the table with the kind of precision that made it clear this gesture was not generosity, but dismissal. The money represented an insult wrapped in currency. "Consider this a gratuity for your attentiveness to detail," he said. "Though I'd suggest your attention would be better served by focusing on the dining experience of other customers rather than pursuing fantasies about my family history." Madison felt her anger ignite beneath her fear. This man had just insulted her mother, had just called her great-grandmother a liar or thief, had just reduced her entire family history to an inconvenient disruption at his dinner. "I have the pin," Madison said. The words came out quietly but with absolute certainty. "I can prove which one is real. I intend to find out exactly what happened in 1952 and why my great-grandmother was accused of stealing something that was given to her." Jonathan Pierce set down his fork. He leaned back in his booth. When he looked at her again, his expression had shifted into something colder than dismissal. It was the look of a predator that understood it was being challenged by someone far smaller. "Be very careful about what you're accusing me of," he said quietly. His voice carried the weight of $300 million, of lawyers on retainer, of power accumulated across 6 decades. "My family's reputation is not something you want to position yourself against. That would be unwise." But Madison Harper did not walk away, despite the terror crystallizing in her chest, despite the knowledge that she had just made an enemy of someone with resources she couldn't fathom. She held his gaze. "Then we're going to find out the truth," she said. Madison's apartment was small enough that she could stand in the kitchen and see into the bedroom where her mother lay. Claire Harper occupied that space like a fossil in amber, preserved but no longer truly alive. The hospice bed dominated the room, metal railings creating a cage around the woman who had spent her entire life fighting against constraints. Her body had become something that happened to her rather than something she controlled. Skin like paper, hair thin as whispers, eyes that retained their sharpness even as everything else deteriorated. It was 11:47 p.m. when Madison entered the bedroom. Claire had been sleeping, but consciousness arrived almost immediately. Her mother's body had learned to remain alert, always listening for danger, always ready for the next crisis. "Sweetheart." Claire's voice came out like rust scraping against metal. "What's wrong?" Madison withdrew the phone from her pocket. The photograph glowed against her palm, a photo she had taken secretly at Romano's with her phone camera angled beneath the table. It showed the pin on Jonathan Pierce's lapel, magnified and clear. Every detail visible. Every element identical to the pin that had lived in this apartment for 40 years. She showed her mother the screen. Claire's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her hands began to tremble, then her shoulders. Then her entire body seemed to collapse inward, as if the weight of 40 years had suddenly become real enough to crush her. Tears emerged without sound at first, silent and terrible, the kind that came from deeper than ordinary grief. "Mom," Madison whispered. "What is it? What's happening?" And Claire told her. The words came out fractured and broken, like stones tumbling down an endless well. The story her mother had carried alone for 4 decades. The secret that had defined her entire existence. Claire's mother, Madison's great-grandmother Eleanor Thompson, had worked as a housekeeper for the Pierce family in Boston during 1952. She was 23 years old, proud, hard-working. She had sent money home to her parents every week. She had believed in the goodness of the people she served. Jonathan's grandmother, Helena Pierce, was being destroyed by her husband. The abuse had become something he no longer bothered to hide. He broke things. He broke her. He broke the promise embedded in their marriage vow. Eleanor discovered Helena unconscious on the bathroom floor on March 15, 1952. Empty pill bottle beside her, barely breathing. Eleanor called for help. Eleanor stayed beside her through the emergency room. Eleanor sat by her bed through recovery. Eleanor became the only person in Helena's life who had witnessed her breaking and had refused to look away. Helena gave Eleanor a gift before she recovered enough to leave the house. She commissioned a Boston silversmith to create 2 identical pins, compass roses, with roses etched in the center. One for Eleanor, one for herself. Symbols of their bond. Symbols of Eleanor being her angel. She said the pin meant, "I saved her life," Claire whispered. That it was proof I could show my children someday. That nobody would ever take that from me. But then Helena died in 1985, and the family, her husband Richard, his lawyers, everyone with something to protect, decided Eleanor was a thief. The real will, which left Eleanor $500,000 and the family beach house, simply disappeared. A fake will materialized. Accusations were lodged. Eleanor's reputation shattered like glass. Eleanor worked until she died in 1998, believing she had been accused of stealing from the woman she had saved. She died wondering if she had imagined their friendship. She died afraid she had been a fool to trust someone with power. The pin is all that remained, Claire said. All that proved it was real, that Eleanor was telling the truth. Madison held her mother while she wept. The photograph still glowed on her phone, the evidence that 40 years of family shame might finally be explained. The proof that Eleanor Thompson had not been a thief. She had been a savior, and the Pierce family had destroyed her for it. Madison spent the next morning researching Jonathan Pierce with the intensity of someone preparing for war. His foundation office occupied the 34th floor of a Charlotte bank building, positioned above the city like judgment. The Pierce Family Foundation funded hospitals and universities and cultural centers. The website described a man committed to social responsibility. Photographs showed him receiving awards, speaking at conferences, dedicating buildings bearing his name. She dressed in the most professional clothes she owned and walked into his office without an appointment. The receptionist attempted to redirect her. Madison bypassed this defense by walking directly toward the corner office, speaking with a kind of certainty that suggested she belonged there. By the time security could be called, she was already standing in front of Jonathan Pierce's desk. He recognized her immediately. Rage flickered across his features before being carefully controlled. "If you're here to pursue some legal action, I suggest you contact a lawyer. I don't respond well to threats disguised as Waitress concerns." Madison placed a velvet box on his desk. Inside, her mother's pin rested on white silk. She positioned it beside her phone, which displayed the photograph of his pin taken the previous evening. 2 identical compass roses, she said quietly, both with roses etched in the center, both displaying micro-engravings with the date March 15, 1952, both created by the same silversmith, both impossible if only one exists. Jonathan's face underwent a transformation. He leaned forward. His predatory confidence shifted into something more fragile. He reached toward the pin, then stopped, as if touching it might confirm something he had been avoiding his entire life. "This can't be real," he said. "It is." His hand hovered over the box. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of internal conflict. "My grandmother Helena wrote about Eleanor in her private diary. I found it after her death. The entries were cryptic. They mentioned Eleanor, my angel. They mentioned a bond that transcended employer and employee. But I was 14 years old, and my father told me the woman had been fired for stealing. I accepted that explanation. I needed to accept it." He finally picked up the pen. He turned it over. He examined the rose etching with the focus of someone solving a mathematical proof. The silversmith, Jonathan said, was given explicit instructions. 1 pin, 1 commission, 1 design. I have his original documentation in my files. This shouldn't exist. My great-grandmother Eleanor lived in poverty for 40 years, believing she was a thief, Madison said. My grandmother Claire has spent her entire life carrying the shame of having a mother accused of stealing. And now my mother is dying, medical bills, destroying everything. Because of a lie the Pierce family created and maintained. Jonathan set down the pen. He made a decision that would realign his entire understanding of his family's history. We hire an independent investigator, he said. A professional. Someone with no connection to either of our families. We hire an antique appraiser with credentials. We examine both pins. We research the records. Whatever the truth is, we find it together. Why would you do that? Madison asked. Why risk discovering something that ruins your family's reputation? Jonathan looked at her with an expression she had never seen on a powerful man's face before. It was vulnerability. It was the realization that legacy built on lies was no legacy at all. Because, he said, whatever happened on March 15, 1952, was significant enough that my grandmother created these pins. That means Eleanor Thompson was important to her. That means this matters. That means I don't have a choice. They became unlikely partners that morning. Former antagonists united by a truth neither had anticipated. The detective and the billionaire. The waitress and the powerful man. Both searching for justice in a story that had been buried for 4 decades. Our quest for truth, Madison said, is now inextricably linked. Jonathan nodded. Then let's find out what really happened. The independent investigator was named Thomas Chen, and he approached the pins with the precision of a surgeon approaching a vital organ. His office contained magnifying equipment and spectral analysis tools and documentation systems perfected across 30 years of appraising rare objects. He photographed both pins from every angle. He measured the roses down to fractional millimeters. He examined the compass points. He studied the metal composition. He documented every microscratch and slight discoloration that suggested age and wear. His conclusion emerged after 3 hours of examination. These were created by the same hands using the same materials during the same time period. But something is wrong with the history. He positioned both pins beneath a specialized microscope. The roses came into focus, intricate and delicate and absolutely identical. But they are barely visible without magnification, were micro-engravings on the back of each rose. Numbers, dates. March 15, 1952, Chen said. Both pins carry the same date, engraved on the back where nobody would see it unless they were looking specifically. This is a date with significance. Jonathan and Madison exchanged looks that acknowledged they had just found evidence of intentionality. These pins weren't created separately. They were created deliberately as pairs, deliberately marked, deliberately meant to commemorate something specific. Jonathan accessed his personal archives that evening. His grandmother's diary emerged from a locked safe. The entries from 1952 were there, fragmented and emotional. Helena writing about despair, writing about escape plans discussed in whispered conversations, writing about Eleanor being the only person who understood what her husband was capable of. The public records searched next revealed Eleanor Thompson's employment with the Pierce family spanning from 1950 to 1985. This contradicted everything the official family history claimed. Eleanor hadn't been fired after 6 months. She had worked there for 35 years. A 1985 newspaper article from the Boston Globe mentioned a family dispute over estate items following Helena Pierce's death. The article was vague, but the implication was clear. Accusations of theft had been made. Investigations had been launched. No charges had been filed. But the damage to Eleanor's reputation was already complete. Madison discovered genealogical records next, birth certificates and employment files. Eleanor Thompson's death certificate, dated 1998, listed her occupation as housemaid. It listed her as having no surviving family. It was a document so sparse it seemed to erase her entire life. But there was more. In the margins of Eleanor's employee file, someone had written, reference the Boston incident. Family business. Do not discuss. This notation appeared in the handwriting of Richard Pierce, Jonathan's grandfather. The reference to March 15, 1952, appeared again and again. In old bank records showing regular payments to Eleanor. In Helena's diary. In employment documentation. In legal files deliberately filed away. What happened on March 15, 1952? Madison whispered. She was reading documents at Jonathan's foundation office at 2 a.m., surrounded by 70 years of family history that no longer made sense. Something, Jonathan said, that the family decided to bury forever. But whatever it was important enough that my grandmother commemorated it on those pins. The investigation had opened a door. Beyond that threshold lay decades of family secrets. Beyond that threshold was the truth that had been hidden, denied, and protected for longer than Madison had been alive. Jonathan's connections within wealthy Boston circles opened doors that normal investigators couldn't access. A former family lawyer agreed to examine the Pierce Foundation's Swiss banking records, accounts that had been dormant for decades but which contained a clear narrative if you knew how to read the numbers. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in solution. Helena Pierce had established a monthly payment to Eleanor Thompson starting in April 1952, 1 month after the mysterious date on the pins. The payments continued consistently for 35 years, until Helena's death in 1985. They were labeled private nurse services on official documentation. But Eleanor had never been a nurse. The amounts were substantial, not enough to constitute full inheritance, but enough to suggest Helena was maintaining some kind of obligation. These weren't charity payments. These were payments that acknowledged a debt. Madison found a collection of Helena's letters written in German, her native language. Helena had corresponded with her sister in Munich throughout the 1950s. A translator named Dr. Sophia Keller examined the letters with the attention they deserved, converting Helena's German into English that captured her emotional intensity. The key passage emerged in a letter written in July 1952. Liebling, SAE hat mir mein Leben zurückgegeben. Als ich alles Hoffnung verloren hat. Translated, my darling, she gave me back my life when I'd lost all hope. The next sentence contained a reference to Eleanor helping Helena understand freedom for the first time in my marriage. The letters described Eleanor's loyalty, Eleanor's wisdom, Eleanor's refusal to judge. The letters described a bond that transcended class and employment. The letters described exactly what the pins had been meant to commemorate. But then, in 1985, someone had decided this narrative was dangerous. Madison and Jonathan discovered they were being followed on a Tuesday afternoon outside the Boston Public Library. The private investigator they had hired to conduct genealogical research mentioned, casually, that photographs had been taken of them entering and exiting the archives. Professional photographs, the kind taken by someone paid to document their movements. An envelope arrived at Madison's apartment that evening. No postage, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typewritten message. Some families don't want their secrets unearthed. Stop digging. The message was accompanied by photographs. Photographs of Madison entering Jonathan's foundation office. Photographs of them together at the archives. Photographs of them at the restaurant where they had met the appraiser. Someone was watching. Someone had resources. Someone wanted them to stop. Madison's hands shook as she showed Jonathan the photographs. This proves something bigger is happening, Jonathan said. His voice had shifted into something harder. Someone believes this investigation is a threat. Someone with resources has decided we should be frightened into silence. What do we do? Madison asked. Jonathan's face showed calculation and resolve in equal measure. We continue, but carefully, and we prepare for whatever comes next. The anonymous warning had achieved the opposite of its intent. Instead of frightening them into silence, it had confirmed that something was being hidden. Something was being protected. Something was worth threatening a waitress and a billionaire to keep buried. The trap was closing, but they didn't yet understand who had said it. That revelation was still waiting in the darkness ahead. Marcus Pierce appeared at Jonathan's office on a Thursday morning, carrying coffee and concern like a gift. Jonathan's younger brother, 58 years old, distinguished and charming, had built a reputation as a philanthropic visionary. He chaired the Pierce Foundation's board. He controlled its direction. He had political ambitions that extended beyond charitable work into seats of political power. I heard about your investigation, Marcus said, settling into the leather chair across from Jonathan's desk. The staff has been talking. Family seeking truth in old records. Very noble, Jonathan, but also very potentially destructive. What do you mean? Jonathan asked, though he already suspected. I mean, Marcus said carefully, but the past is often better left as memory rather than examined as fact. Our family has a reputation, a legacy. Our foundation depends on that reputation remaining untarnished. Digging into old stories about grandmother Helena and some long-dead housekeeper, it won't end well. Eleanor Thompson isn't just some long-dead housekeeper, Jonathan said. She saved Helena's life. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Knowledge. How would you know that? Marcus asked. Jonathan showed his brother the pins. He explained the marks, the dates, the letters, the payments. Marcus listened with the careful attention of someone assessing a threat he hadn't anticipated. Eleanor Thompson was an employee, Marcus said firmly. Whatever emotional connection grandmother Helena felt, it was complicated by class and responsibility. Creating mythology around it now helps no one. But Madison was watching Marcus carefully. She noticed the way his jaw tightened when she mentioned March 15th, 1952. She noticed the way his hands clenched when Jonathan produced the German letters from Helena. She noticed he already knew. He already understood. He was protecting something. Come to Cape Cod, Marcus offered, to the family estate. I can show you the archives. Everything related to Helena's personal effects, her correspondence, her documented history. If truth is what you're seeking, let me help you find it. It seemed like generosity. It was calculated strategy. At the Cape Cod estate, Marcus guided them through room after room of documented family history. But his movements were strategic. He steered them away from certain document boxes. He suggested they focus on particular records while suggesting others were already thoroughly examined. He controlled the narrative with the precision of someone who had spent decades learning to manage information. Madison entered Marcus's private office while he was occupied in another room. She noticed shredded documents in his waste bin, strips of paper that had been deliberately destroyed. She photographed them with her phone. Later, she and Jonathan would attempt to piece them together like a jigsaw puzzle. The fragments revealed something devastating. They showed a will. They showed Eleanor Thompson's name. They showed amounts of money. They showed property descriptions. They showed everything that had been deliberately erased from the official family record. Marcus had known. Marcus had found the original will, the real will, at some point in his life. Marcus had kept it hidden. Marcus had maintained the lie that protected the Pierce family's reputation and, more importantly, protected his own political aspirations and foundation power. That night, Madison confronted him directly. You already knew about Eleanor, she said. You already knew about what happened on March 15th, 1952. You found the real will at some point and decided it was better hidden than revealed. Marcus's friendly demeanor evaporated. His face hardened into something colder and more predatory than Jonathan's had ever been. This was a man accustomed to winning, a man not prepared to lose. Yes, he said simply, and you need to stop. The documents Madison had photographed were reconstructed through methodical patience. She and Jonathan worked through the night, assembling fragments of the original will like an archaeological expedition of their own family history. What emerged was revolutionary. Helena Pierce's authentic will, written in 1982, 3 years before her death, documented everything, not as vague reference, but as explicit narrative. It will read like a confession, like Helena unburdening herself through legal document. On March 15, 1952, Helena Pierce had attempted suicide. She had taken sleeping pills. She had prepared to leave this life. Her husband, Richard Pierce, had been escalating his violence. He had broken her ribs. He had fractured her collarbone. He had made it clear that marriage to him was a life sentence of diminishing circumstances. Eleanor Thompson found her. Eleanor called the ambulance. Eleanor stayed by her bedside through emergency care and recovery. Eleanor became the only person in Helena's life who looked at her destroyed body and her shattered spirit and said, I will help you find a way out. They planned Eleanor's escape strategy together. They discussed how Helena might eventually leave Richard, how she might disappear into a new life, how she might reclaim her existence from the man who was destroying it. They became bound by survival and shared vision of freedom. Helena had a silversmith create the pins to commemorate this bond. 2 identical compass roses pointing toward new horizons. Eleanor was going to help Helena escape. But then Richard discovered the plan. He discovered the letters, the communications, the conspiracy between his wife and their housemaid to betray him. He contacted his lawyer, a man named Samuel Foster, Marcus's godfather, and together they created an alternative narrative. Eleanor Thompson didn't become a co-conspirator in Helena's freedom. She became a thief. She became accused of stealing jewelry, cash, and valuables from the Pierce home. The accusations were announced publicly. Eleanor's reputation was destroyed. She was fired. She was blacklisted. She spent the next 35 years working menial jobs to survive, unable to explain that she had been protecting a woman from abuse. But Helena, trapped by propriety and circumstance, accepted her husband's version of events. She maintained the official story that Eleanor had betrayed her. She did this to protect Eleanor from retaliation. She did this because divorce in 1952 Boston society was unthinkable. She did this because staying married to Richard Pierce was the price she paid for Eleanor's survival. The monthly payments to Eleanor were guilt. They were acknowledgement. They were Helena's only way of maintaining Eleanor's survival, while publicly condemning her. They were two women trying to protect each other, while imprisoned by a system designed to destroy them both. Helena had written all of this in her will. She had named Eleanor Thompson explicitly as the person she wished to receive $500,000 and the family beach house. She had written a letter to accompany the will, explaining the truth of what happened on March 15, 1952. But when Helena died in 1985, that will disappeared. Richard Pierce and Samuel Foster, with assistance from a younger Marcus Pierce who was being trained into power, produced a false will that left Eleanor nothing. They buried the truth. They protected Richard's reputation. They erased Eleanor Thompson from the official family narrative. Marcus inherited the Pierce Foundation and built a career on the family's supposedly pristine reputation. His political aspirations depended on the Pierce name remaining untarnished. The discovery of the original would have destroyed everything. It would have revealed that the foundation was built on a lie. It would have exposed the family's complicity in ruining a woman who had saved their matriarch's life. Jonathan read the will aloud in silence, understanding that he had spent his entire life inside a family built on deception. He understood that his grandmother's journals referred to Eleanor not as staff, but as savior. He understood that his grandfather was something worse than he had ever allowed himself to imagine. They destroyed her, Madison whispered, on purpose, to hide what really happened. Eleanor lived as a thief, Jonathan said, his voice hollow, for 45 years, believing that she had been caught doing something wrong, believing she had betrayed a woman she loved, dying without ever understanding the truth. The revelation wasn't just about the past. It was about the present. It was about what Marcus was willing to protect. It was about what the Pierce family would do to maintain the illusion of legitimacy. Marcus had found the original will decades ago. He had chosen to keep it hidden. He had chosen to let Eleanor die as a disgraced woman rather than risk family scandal. Marcus discovered they had found the original will when Jonathan's expression shifted. Marcus had been watching them examine documents in the Cape Cod Estate Library. He had watched Madison photograph fragments. He had been calculating the moment when they would understand, when they would realize the magnitude of what he had hidden. His response was immediate and ruthless. "Put the documents down," he said, his voice carrying the lethal calm of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Both of you, step away from that table." Jonathan stood. Madison followed. Marcus positioned himself between them and the exit, a physical gesture that suggested this was about to become confrontation rather than conversation. "You found it," Marcus said. "The real will, the documentation that grandmother never intended to remain hidden. Congratulations. You discovered something that destroys everything our family has built." "Our family," Jonathan said. "Our family destroyed an innocent woman's life to protect a lie." "Our family survived," Marcus corrected. "We maintained dignity. We protected reputation. Do you understand what exposure of this truth would mean? The foundation's donors would withdraw. My political career would evaporate. The Pierce name would be synonymous with cruelty and deception." "It should be," Madison said, "because that's exactly what happened." Marcus laughed, a sound without warmth. You understand nothing about how the world functions. Eleanor Thompson was a housekeeper. She was a person of no consequence. Her life, her reputation, her suffering. These were acceptable costs for protecting what mattered. She mattered to my grandmother, Jonathan said. She saved her life. And grandmother chose to accept our family's protection over Eleanor's vindication, Marcus replied. That's the choice powerful people make. That's how continuity is maintained. He moved toward them with deliberate slowness. There was no physical threat, but his presence became suffocating. This was a man demonstrating that consequence could take many forms. I'm prepared to offer you compensation, Marcus said, addressing Madison. $2 million. Transferred to your account this evening. In exchange, you sign an NDA. You destroy all copies of this documentation. You agree to never speak of Eleanor Thompson, March 15, 1952, or anything related to this investigation. You disappear from Jonathan's life and return to your normal existence. No, Madison said immediately. Consider it carefully, Marcus continued. Your mother is dying. Medical bills are destroying your future. I can make all of that disappear. I can ensure she receives the best treatment available. I can ensure you escape the poverty that's been suffocating your family. That's what $2 million can purchase. Madison felt temptation flicker. A moment where she considered what her mother's life could be with that kind of resources. But then she understood. Marcus was offering her the exact transaction that had destroyed Eleanor. He was offering her silence in exchange for survival. He was offering her complicity in exchange for comfort. No, she repeated. Marcus's expression darkened. Then we move into Messier territory. I have lawyers prepared to sue both of you for defamation. I have documentation ready to file claiming you engaged in extortion and blackmail. I have witnesses prepared to testify that this entire investigation was motivated by financial gain. Your life, Miss Harper, will become considerably more complicated. He paused, letting this threat crystallize. Additionally, he continued, I might mention to the appropriate authorities that your mother's medical coverage, specifically the experimental treatment protocol she's currently receiving, is funded through a foundation grant I personally oversee. Cancellation of such funding would necessitate alternative arrangements. It would be unfortunate if Claire Harper suddenly lost access to the treatment keeping her alive. The threat was delivered with surgical precision. Marcus wasn't threatening death directly. He was simply pointing out the mechanisms by which life could be withdrawn. He was demonstrating power through the infrastructure that controlled survival. Jonathan's transformation happened in that moment. He moved physically closer to his brother. His voice became something harder than it had been before. A man choosing between family loyalty and fundamental moral integrity. You're threatening Madison's mother to silence this investigation? I'm explaining reality, Marcus said. The consequence structure that determines what happens next. You're exactly like grandfather, Jonathan said quietly. You become exactly like the man who destroyed Eleanor Thompson to protect his reputation. You'd rather destroy living people than admit we were wrong. Correct, Marcus said without hesitation. And I have the resources to make that destruction comprehensive. He reached for his phone. His gesture was clear. He was calling his lawyers. He was initiating legal warfare. He was beginning a process that would attempt to destroy them both. But Jonathan had already made his preparations. He had uploaded everything. The original will, the photographs, the documentation, the letters, the evidence of Marcus's decades of cover-up, to his personal attorney with explicit instructions. If anything happened to him or Madison, if they experienced any legal action or financial pressure or threat to their well-being, the documents would be released to media, law enforcement, and the Pierce Foundation's board of directors. You've already lost, Jonathan said. Whatever you do from this moment forward, everything comes out. The only choice remaining is whether you cooperate with the truth or spend the rest of your life fighting an unwinnable war. Marcus's phone froze mid-dial. He understood in that moment that power had shifted, that preparation and foresight had neutralized his weapons, that everything he had protected for decades was about to become irrelevant. One chance remained. One moment where public justice could be delivered. One opportunity to transform decades of hidden family shame into undeniable, witnessed consequence. The Boston Harbor Hotel existed as a monument to wealth and power. The wharf room occupied its crowning level, positioned so that those inside could look down at the harbor that had made the city prosperous. 300 people filled the ballroom on that October evening. Philanthropists and politicians and donors whose names appeared on building plaques and scholarship funds. The Pierce Foundation Annual Gala had become Boston's most anticipated social event. Tonight, Marcus Pierce was receiving the Humanitarian of the Year award. The irony was suffocating. Madison pushed her mother's wheelchair through a service entrance, avoiding security protocols that had been deliberately bypassed through Jonathan's connections. Claire wore the best dress she could find, something elegant but modest, something that wouldn't call attention until the moment was designed to explode. Madison dressed in black, nearly invisible, designed to disappear into background until she needed to become impossible to ignore. Jonathan moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged there. He had attended these galas his entire life. He had made small talk with senators. He had danced with the wives of politicians. He had been raised to move through this world as naturally as breathing. But tonight he moved with different purpose. Marcus stood on the stage, acceptance speech already written and memorized. He talked about service and responsibility and the Pierce family's commitment to making the world better. The audience applauded. Donors nodded. The narrative of his goodness and integrity and philanthropic vision remained intact until Jonathan walked on stage. He took the microphone during the moment when Marcus was shaking hands with the foundation's board president. The crowd murmured confusion. This wasn't planned. This wasn't on the program. Security began moving forward, but Jonathan raised his hand with the kind of authority that made them pause. "Before my brother accepts this award," Jonathan said, his voice carrying through the ballroom with perfect clarity, "there's something everyone should know about the Pierce family's history." The crowd stilled. Phones appeared. People recognized opportunity when they encountered it. Large screens descended from a ceiling. Screens Jonathan had arranged to be installed weeks ago, disguised as lighting equipment. The reel will appear first. The documentation. The photographs of both compass pins. The letters from Helena written in German, translated and displayed for everyone to see. Then came the image that changed everything. The photograph of Marcus, taken just 2 weeks ago, shredding documents in his office. The evidence he had destroyed. The cover-up caught on security camera feed. Marcus's face drained of color. He attempted to move from a stage. Jonathan blocked his path. "This is a desperate attempt at extortion," Marcus said, but his voice carried no conviction. He was calculating now, assessing the damage, recognizing he had lost the ability to control narrative. Then Madison pushed her mother's wheelchair onto the stage. Claire Harper looked small and fragile against the ballroom's grandeur. Her voice was weak from cancer treatment, but it carried the weight of 40 years of inherited shame. She spoke about Eleanor Thompson. She spoke about a woman accused of theft because she had saved someone's life. She spoke about a family that had destroyed an innocent person to protect their reputation. "The Pierce family didn't just steal money," Claire said, each word deliberate and painful. "They stole my mother's dignity. They stole her name. They stole her future. And they let her die, believing she was a criminal." The audience was silent. Phones continued recording. Media personnel recognized the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Marcus attempted to speak, to explain, to control the narrative one final time. We didn't." "You did," Jonathan said. "You found the real years ago. You understood the truth and decided to keep it hidden. You protected yourself instead of protecting innocent people." Security video played on the screens. Marcus captured clearly, deliberately feeding shredded documents into a commercial shredder. Marcus, looking at the camera without fear because he believed he would never be held accountable. But accountability had arrived. The board members stood. Donors began leaving. Media rushed forward with cameras and questions. A lawyer in the crowd began discussing legal implications. Someone called police. Someone else called news outlets. Within minutes, The gala transformed from celebration into catastrophe. Marcus's downfall was complete and witnessed by the people who mattered most to him. His reputation, the legacy he had spent his life protecting, evaporated in real time. Justice, delivered publicly and irreversibly. 3 months later, Madison stood in front of Eleanor's grave. The cemetery was quiet in the Boston autumn. Leaves covered the ground like a blanket someone had carefully arranged. The Pierce Foundation had settled. $4.5 million transferred to Madison's family. Claire's medical bills had been paid. Her experimental treatment protocol continued uninterrupted. For the first time in her adult life, Madison's mother wasn't drowning in debt. Eleanor's name had been officially cleared. The Pierce family issued a public statement acknowledging the truth of what happened on March 15, 1952. They acknowledged the injustice. They acknowledged the wrong that had been done. They acknowledged that Eleanor Thompson had not been a thief, but a hero. Marcus Pierce had resigned from the Pierce Foundation. Criminal investigations were ongoing for document destruction and fraud. His political aspirations had evaporated. His reputation had become synonymous with deception. Jonathan stood beside Madison at the grave. In his hands he held two things: a stone monument that would mark Eleanor's grave with the truth, and a photograph of the compass pins now displayed at the Boston Women's History Museum. The exhibit was titled Hidden Heroes, The Women Who Saved Each Other, a permanent testament to what Helena and Eleanor had been to each other. "I created a scholarship," Jonathan said quietly, "the Eleanor Thompson Justice Foundation. It provides opportunities for descendants of people who have experienced documented historical injustice. People like your family, people whose stories were erased, people whose names were destroyed to protect powerful people's reputations." Madison had been hired as the foundation's director of historical justice. Her job was to investigate other historical wrongs that the Pierce family wealth had been built upon, to find the stories that had been buried, to bring them into light, to attempt making right what had been deliberately wronged. Claire responded to treatment. Her cancer went into remission. For the first time, Madison allowed herself to believe her mother would survive beyond the next medical crisis. Madison visited the museum on a Thursday afternoon. She stood in front of the display case where the two compass pins were positioned side by side. Helena's pin and Eleanor's pin. Two women separated by class but united by survival and love and the decision to save each other. The plaque read, "Symbols of an unbreakable bond between two brave women. Helena Pierce, 1928 to 1985, and Eleanor Thompson, 1929 to 1998. This exhibition honors their courage and the consequences of choosing truth over convenience." Madison thought about inheritance, about what we pass down to the next generation. She thought about how families built themselves on either truth or lies. She thought about Jonathan choosing truth despite the cost. She thought about her mother, finally free from the shame of a crime she had never committed. True wealth isn't what you inherit. It's what you do when you learn the truth. Jonathan had learned this. He was rebuilding his family's legacy one truth at a time. He had chosen to become the person his grandfather had refused to be. He had chosen to become the man his grandmother would have wanted him to be. Justice delayed was not justice denied. It was justice that had finally arrived. Madison looked at the pins, silver compass, roses pointing toward different horizons, but connected eternally by the choice two women had made to save each other. If this story moved you, if the courage of Eleanor and Helena and Jonathan touched something inside you, hit that like button right now. Because like and subscribe. Because these are the stories nobody wants told. These are the truths families try to bury. These are the moments when ordinary people stand up to powerful institutions and refuse to accept lies anymore. Subscribe so you never miss a story of hidden truth finally brought to light. So you're never caught off guard by the power of courage. So you remember that justice, however delayed, can still prevail. Share this with someone who needs to know that standing up for truth matters. Share this with someone whose family has buried its own secrets. Share this with someone who believes that one person can't make a difference. Because Madison Harper was just a waitress, but she changed everything. And comment below. What family mystery do you wish you could solve? What truth has your family buried? What would you do if you discovered your inheritance was built on lies? Your story might be next. Your truth might be the one that changes everything. The past is never as dead as we believe. Justice is never as impossible as the powerful would have us think. And truth is always worth the risk.